So now we're moving on to Module 2, the need for psychological science. And this module will prepare you for Module 3, which is revolving around the scientific method. I'm going to get you to think like scientists during Module 2. So humans cannot rely solely on intuition and common sense. So most human beings engage in three types of errors in everyday thinking: hindsight bias, overconfidence, and the tendency to perceive patterns in random events, which is also known as the coincidence error, or seeing order or seeing meaning in random events. Hindsight bias, this is kind of I knew it all along phenomenon, the tendency that we can foresee an outcome, that we would have predicted the outcome after it occurred. And this occurs very commonly in our lives. I mean, take for instance that job interview you go on, and you come back from that job interview and you were 100% certain that I'm getting the job. Oh, they loved me. It went so well. It was great. It was wonderful. And then 2 weeks later, you get that phone call. I'm sorry, we went with somebody else. And so what do you say to yourself? It's well, I knew they were looking for someone with a better background in a certain field that I didn't have, or I knew they looked at me funny when I was at the interview. They really didn't seem that interested in me. You're saying this 2 weeks after the fact when they call you or they send you an email saying that you didn't get the job. But right after the job interview, you were 100% certain that you were getting the job. You were convinced, you were telling your friends and your family, and you were so excited, I'm getting this job, it's an awesome job, it's wonderful. Yet, you didn't get it, and now you're trying to convince yourself why you didn't get it. And so you can think of the hindsight bias kind of stems from our ability to want to seem like we have control over the situation. We want to have control over the world, over the outcomes of the behaviors we engage in. Take another example. And the example is, let's say you're interested in a particular person romantically, and you feel like all good about it. You think it's going to work out. You feel like you're getting the vibe from this person that, like, oh, this person seems really interested. I know they're checking me out. They're really, they're really into me. This has a lot of potential. And then you work up the courage to make your move. And after you make your move, you fail miserably. And so you feel crushed, but you rationalize it. You go back and say, well, I knew that I wasn't this person's type, or this person seemed to be interested in other things. You kind of rationalize it. That you knew it all along, and you didn't want to, you didn't want to admit to yourself that this was the case. The second major error that we engage in everyday thinking is overconfidence. And here's one example where you can actually check out overconfidence and see overconfidence in action. So how many seconds, if you look at the anagrams on the left of the screen, how many seconds would it take you to unscramble each anagram? Well, most people say, 20 seconds or so, 10 seconds, so maybe 30 seconds to a minute total. And they tend to be wrong about this. Most people will underestimate how good they are at this task, and it will normally take them double or triple the time to actually unscramble the words. And this is a very benign situation, but it happens, in situations in which the stakes are much higher. For example, when you take quizzes and you take tests, you show up and you're like, I know the material is great. It's easy. I'm interested in it. I see everything's working well. I got it. I'm sure I'm going to do well. And then you get that exam or you get that quiz. You sit down and you're like, oh no, what happened? This is a disaster. So these situations happen, commonly throughout our lives. And, we tend to be overconfident in sort of, how well we're going to perform in particular situations. This also works in eyewitness testimony. So people that have been raped or attacked, they are 100% certain that they know the face, or they could pick the person or the perpetrator, they could pick that person out of a lineup. And when they go to pick that person out of the lineup, what happens is in 20%, 33% of the occasion, they're picking the wrong person out of the lineup. And once they pick that wrong person out of the lineup, they go to a criminal trial, and this becomes a disaster because the wrong person gets convicted, and they spend their life in jail. Well, until recently, when DNA evidence came to be usable in a courtroom. Before that, they've spent their whole life in jail, innocent people. This is the case of Ronald Cotton that we'll get into later in the course, where he was wrongly accused of raping a woman who he did not rape, but he looked like the real perpetrator, and he was picked out of the lineup, and he spent 10 years in jail innocently until DNA got him free. And these errors in memory are a result of overconfidence. Witnesses are 100% sure that they know who the perpetrator is, who raped them or who assaulted them, and in many cases they're wrong. The third error that we generally engage in everyday thinking is perceiving order in random events. So we perceive order in random events because we want to seem like the world makes sense to us. For instance, I used to go throughout my life, I should say, and I used to believe that, if something good happened, then something bad had to happen to kind of balance out the equation. So if something really good happened to me, which didn't always really happen to me very often, I was looking for that negative thing. I was looking for that dark cloud to follow me around and kind of balance out the equation. Because I felt like good things had to be offset by bad things. And in reality, this is just, trying to understand the way the universe works. And it doesn't work this way. I mean, a lot of things that happen through life are random events. And we try to look for a reason in this random events because that gives us a sense of control, once again, of our lives. And a lot of times we can't, look for a reason in these random events. Some things are just random. Another example of this is people that win the jackpot in the mega lotteries. I mean, not the mega millions per se, because that's a really rare event. But even smaller jackpots, like where you're winning millions of dollars in the lottery. Some people will play and play and play, and they'll lose and they'll lose, and they'll think that that they're due for a win. And this is how gambling addiction gets started, that people will play and play and play the slot machines or poker or craps or something that's a fairly random event, and they feel that if they've lost a certain number of times that they're due for a win. They're somehow due for a win because that's how the world works. That there has to be kind of a balance. They're looking for order in random events. Gambling's a random event. And these people will continue to play and waste money gambling and lose tons and tons of money, hoping or thinking that there's going to be a turnaround. This is known as the gambler's fallacy. That there is some kind of order here, and we're looking for that. And if I lost and lost and lost, I'm due for a win. Or the opposite can happen. I'm on a hot streak. I'm winning. I'm going to keep winning because I'm on a hot streak. That I can't be stopped. I can't lose. Well, that's not necessarily true either. Everything is random, and each time you play or you gamble or play a game, it's a random event. You have a certain probability of winning and a certain probability of losing. And the next time you play, it's the same random event. There is no pattern there. People look for pattern. They try to find pattern. They try to justify patterns, but there is no pattern there. And so part of this is understanding that the world works by probability. The world works in random ways, and we have to accept that. Yet another example would be, someone that just has really bad luck. Let's say that they're struck by lightning multiple times. It has happened. Just like someone has won the lottery multiple times, someone else could be struck by lightning multiple times. And we think, wow, that person's living a very hard life. They must do something to deserve this. It must be karma. It must be cosmic retribution. When in fact it's neither. They're just very unlucky. These are random events that happen to the person. It doesn't mean that they deserve it, that they're getting what they deserve in any way, or that karma's, having its retribution is coming to get them, or whatnot. I mean, people tend to want to look at the world as a just world, that like good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, and that's just not necessarily the case. Sometimes people just run into a string of random events that are negative in nature, like being struck by lightning, or sometimes it's positive. And it kind of bounces out. Everything is distributed generally in a normal curve, and we'll talk a little bit about statistics later in the course. But some people will not be struck by lightning at all during their life, well, most people, and there'll be a few people that are going to be struck multiple times. It's very low probability, but it can happen. The same thing with the lottery. You're going to have a few repeat winners, and people need to accept that a lot of life's events are random, and we can't just kind of try to see patterns there that aren't there. I mean, that kind of reminds me of that movie Serendipity, the movie with Kate Beckinsale, where she like writes her phone number in some library book in New York City and leaves that on a shelf, random shelf, and says, "Well, if you can find this book in all of New York City, I left it on some shelf in a library, and God knows how many libraries there are in New York City. That you can call me and we'll go on a date." I mean, talk about arrogance. Uh, but she thinks that there's a meaning to the world, and that if this person is meant to be with me, that he will find this book somewhere in New York City, even though where would we even start looking? So some people just have this idea that, well, most people, I should say, have this idea that there is some order, and it makes us feel like we're in control of things, or that the world makes sense to us. And it's hard for people to grasp that a lot of life events are truly random. So why are these three errors generally made? Uh, it's generally made because we want to feel like we're in control, or have some knowledge of the world, and it makes us feel safe. It makes us feel safe if we can rationalize why something happened, or we can feel that we're in control of some event that's going to happen to us, or in the case of overconfidence, I mean, maybe it's good for us to be overconfident because that can lead to altruism. We can end up helping people if we feel good in our abilities. We're more likely to share our abilities with other people, and that could be a positive thing, but it also could be a negative thing because maybe we just kind of overestimate our ability and we don't study as hard, or we don't come prepared for things that we should be more prepared for. So it cuts both ways, but a lot of it is just about having this intuition and trusting our gut feeling. A lot of us rely on our gut feeling. But as a scientist, you can't rely on your gut feeling. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. It doesn't matter how you feel about something. What matters is that you're testing your hypothesis, and you're collecting data, and your data support your hypothesis or don't support your hypothesis. And we'll get all into this in Module 3. It's not about gut feeling. Gut feelings are, nice, and gut feelings are, can be important in certain situations in which there's no data to drive our decision making. But in science, gut feelings do not cut it. And to think like a scientist, we need to abandon these gut feelings. So I want to go through the three aspects of the scientific attitude now: curiosity, skepticism, and humility. So, curiosity is a passion to explore and understand the world without being misled or without misleading others. And so, curiosity is the heart of being a good scientist. You have to want to ask questions and answer those questions, and your life revolves around those questions. And as a psychologist, there's so many things that we don't know, and there's so many interesting questions to ask, and we need to pursue these. And part of my job is to answer these questions in the areas that I do research in. And most of the areas I do research in are health areas, health psychology, the effects of stress, anxiety, depression, and intervention based research using meditation and other mindfulness based therapies to help people take control of their lives and to live moment to moment. And I was curious about, what's the best way to help people that are suffering, that are under a lot of stress constantly, that are living with a lot of physical ailments, a lot of somatization, physical ailments without any organic basis. And I researched all these different things, and I came up with hypotheses and tested my hypotheses through research. But it all starts with curiosity, because if you're not curious, if you don't have questions to answer, then this is not the field that you deserve to be in. You want to ask questions. If you're working in a field that you want to make a career out of, you're always going to be curious about different things. And as a researcher and as a scientist, the number one element you must possess is curiosity, because otherwise, why bother? Why spend all this time and all this money and, waste your life to a degree if you're not interested in answering questions? Then why bother? And so one thing you have to be, especially in this course, be curious, ask questions. I know it's an online course, but I'm trying to make it as interactive as possible. And contribute to the discussion board, and learn from each other, and learn from me, obviously. But learn from each other, and ask questions, because the more questions you ask, the better you're going to retain the information, and the more you're going to get out of the course. The second element, well, there's not really an element, but the second aspect of this whole process of the scientific attitude involves critical thinking. And that's kind of what you want to be engaging in. And this is the opposite of intuition. Critical thinking is using the scientific method and to develop effective and accurate ways to figure out what makes people work the way they work, what's making people think the way they think. And this is like scientifically testing and asking, where's the proof? Where's the data? Where's the support for my ideas? Not just like I saw this infomercial on TV and some doctor on there said, oh, it works great, and I believe him because he's a doctor. No. Where's the data? You see a lot of things on the news that are it's just garbage. We saw you see correlations being broadcast on the news all the time. We'll talk about correlation in Module 3. These correlations are not really, telling us much. They're telling us that two things are associated, but it doesn't tell us that one causes the other. Yet you see this misreported on the news all the time, that there is a causal relationship between, a new study showed a correlation, and we determined that this causes. No, it doesn't. That's complete garbage. So a lot of times, even just watching the news, you have to think critically. You have to know, like, where's the data? Where's the research? How did they test it? How did they measure this? Who was the participants? Who was the sample composed of? And you're going to get to that point. And we're just starting our long journey in psychology. But you get to this point where you're going to want to have answers, and you're going to have this really critical way of examining things, and that's what you have to kind of hone, this way of thinking about the world critically, and not just using gut feelings and intuition, but actually saying, where's the proof, where's the data? I'm not going to believe something until someone shows me something that can really convince me. So critical thinking contains all these different aspects. Is there a flaw in how the information is collected? Discarding your personal assumptions and your personal biases when looking at the evidence. Obviously, if you're biased in some way and you're looking for an answer, you're going to find it. And this is not how you want to analyze the data and look at the evidence. You have to be totally unbiased. So if you're sponsoring a study, if you're gonna have some monetary bonus, or monetary gain or loss from a particular study, then it's not appropriate for you to be engaging in this study, because it's going to influence how you look at the data and the conclusions that you draw. You also have to search for hidden assumptions, decide if you agree that there are hidden assumptions. So, like for example, pharmaceutical companies, they fund their own studies for the drugs that they create. And obviously, this is part of the whole R&D, research and development process. You have to ask, do these people have any sort of interest in looking at the data in a way, or interpreting the data in a way that supports their beliefs? And how would you interpret the data? How would you look at their study? What are the flaws in the study? Can they be objective, that they're testing their own drugs that they're spending tons and tons of money to create? And also, the last one here that you see on the right of the screen, considering alternative explanations. And this is really vital. There are sometimes alternative explanations in how the data is collected or the research is produced, and you need to look at how the authors deal with these alternative explanations. How do they explain them? How do they rule them out? And alternative explanations are very problematic in all kinds of correlational research designs that we're going to see later in the course. So now the second component of a scientific attitude is skepticism. And this is always questioning behaviors and mental processes. What do you mean? How do you know? Like, do not just accept things at face value. Always ask for proof. Don't believe things at face value. And the number one skeptic, one of the best skeptics out there, is the amazing Randy. He was a magician, a former magician, and now he's debunked a variety of psychic phenomena. You'll be watching one of the videos with the amazing Randy for week 2, debunking psychic phenomenon with the former Israeli psychic Uri Geller, going back a few decades ago. And it's a really interesting case how people want to believe in psychic phenomenon. And the amazing Randy is such an awesome guy that he has this Amazing Randy Foundation. And so if you just Google Amazing Randy Foundation, you'll see that there is a challenge that he offers that if you can demonstrate a psychic ability, that you'll win $1 million. You'll win $1 million if you can demonstrate a psychic ability. And so many people have partaken in this challenge, and none have actually won the $1 million, because he's basically shown that all of these people's abilities are just kind of trickery. Just like a magician. Like, he's a former magician, he can recognize a magician. That many of these psychic powers don't really exist, and you run into people that say, "Oh, I can psychokinetically move objects." I met a woman once that said she could psychokinetically cause a car accident with her mind, and I was like, "Wow, where's the proof?" But obviously she had no proof. But people think they can foretell the future, or they dream things, and they can see the future. Oh, I dreamed it and it came true. Well, really? How many times did you do that? Once, twice? It's a coincidence. I mean, are you seeing the future outcomes in your dreams? Probably not. That's not to say that there's nobody out there that could possibly have a psychic power. It's just that psychic powers are not all that common, and we have to think skeptically. We have to think very critically, and not just believe people that they say they have psychic powers, or they're on TV and they have psychic powers. And we have to really engage in that kind of skeptical attitude to be good scientists. You see old people that believe in horoscopes. They follow their horoscopes, and maybe you are one that follows a horoscope. And the question you ask is, why are you doing this? Do you think the horoscope is telling you about the future? Well, if you do, look at the horoscope for another sign, a sign that you're not, and see if that horoscope applies to your life. And chances are, if you look at a different sign than the one you actually are, you're going to see that that horoscope does apply to your life. And so does all the horoscopes that are written. Because many of these horoscopes that are written are vague generalities, and they hold true to all people's lives. Yet you encounter people that will sort of cling very tightly to this belief of a horoscope, and they're checking the horoscope all the time. It's almost like they want to believe that there is people that could tell the future, or that could perform psychic abilities and acts. It's just not there. And so you have to be skeptical. And although many people find comfort in this psychic phenomenon and believe in this stuff, you really need to learn to abandon it and ask, where's the data? Where's the proof? You can move things with your mind. Okay, show me. I'll test it scientifically. I'll look at the data, and then I'll draw my conclusion. But just don't go with gut feelings or intuition or wanting to believe, because people want a lot of things. And just because people want things doesn't mean they're actually going to happen. And the last part of the scientific attitude is humility. This is awareness that mistakes are possible, and you need to admit your mistakes. And scientists don't show humility. A lot of scientists are not comfortable admitting they're wrong. One, because they put a lot of time and money into it. They think very highly of themselves. They can be very arrogant scientists. And two, there's this publish or perish mentality in academia these days, where if you don't publish your results, you're not going to have a job. So people are very motivated to be correct and kind of force themselves to be correct, and they do very strange things with their data. Uh, but in today's academic environment, you need to admit as a scientist that you can be wrong. You need to be humble. You need to show humility, because if you don't, people will try to follow in your footsteps and repeat the same things you're doing and do the same kind of research or follow along the lines of that research. And you'll be leading them down a dead end. And it happens so many times that, other researchers, they read about interesting study and they go, okay, I want to really study that phenomenon in more depth. So I'm going to run similar experiments that build off of that finding. And they can't do it. They can't replicate the previous results. And then there becomes an argument, who's right and who's wrong. And of course, the person that published it is never going to admit that they're wrong, because they're like, look at my data. I published it. It's right. There's evidence for what I believe in. Even if that data isn't very pure, even if that data is kind of tarnished, or they've stretched the assumptions a bit. They've kind of, I'm not saying fabricated the data, but they've done some questionable practices with the data to kind of fit what they want to believe in. Something that I would, as a reviewer, a journal reviewer, which I am, I would be very critical of. Not everyone's as critical with their data as I am. So you have to admit that you're wrong, and that, please, I wasted time. I've done it as a grad student. I wasted a whole year on a series of experiments that didn't work out. And I said, this didn't work. So stop this and let's go back to something else. And, let me get the data for that and eventually get to the dissertation. And I felt bad that I wasted a year, but I was going nowhere. I was wrong. I have to admit I'm wrong and reverse course. And many scientists are not doing that these days. They're kind of stubbornly sticking to what they believe in. So you must show humility.